Happy National Bird Day, everyone. Well, actually, it was 3 days ago. But as I said over on the tease a little while ago, if you share your life or care for somebody else's avian best friend, every day should be Bird Day. Birds come in 10,000 different species, all sorts of sizes, and their lifespan can be from 5 to 80 years. So it's such an important consideration when you're adopting a bird that you choose well. I'm proud to say, I don't know if you guys can see it, I'm wearing some owls today. As a child, I loved seeing the owls at the zoo, and I had an amazing collection of them. And for Christmas, my dearest friend gave these to me. They were her grandmother's, and they're just very precious. So I thought they were appropriate to wear today as we talk about birds. Now, although many humans may cohabitate with birds, we're really quite dissimilar. We're much more similar to our canine and feline friends. For starters, mating habits, the male bird may actually regurgitate on the female to get her interest. And the female may just start randomly laying eggs, which can be a problem because it can deplete her calcium. Anatomically, birds have an expandable muscular pouch under the throat. It's known as the crop, where they soften up food before digestion. And they actually have a gizzard that kind of churns up everything and helps with the digestion as well. So since they don't have teeth like we or our cats or our dogs. Birds' forelimbs have been modified into wings. And the wing bones are hollow, and they actually contain air sacs because as the bird speeds in flight, it just allows his respiratory system to work and to deliver the much needed oxygen better, and also makes him light. So let's talk a little bit about having a bird in your home. After you've done your research and chosen the correct bird for you and your family, there's a few things to consider. Number one is the cage. It preferably should be made of metal and not painted. A lot of the painted ones have lead paint and the birds will chew on them, so that can definitely be a problem. Hey, Paul, thank you for joining in. Plastic or wooden cages obviously can be chewed through. Flora, hello. You're all the way, I think, up in colder country. Thanks for joining as well. Other things about the cage is that it should be wide enough for a bird to extend his wings 2 times the width of his wingspan, and he should be able to fly from perch to perch. Birds aren't helicopters, so having a tall cage is, as opposed to a longer one, isn't necessarily a good thing for the bird. The bird needs the distance to fly. As far as the perch goes, it needs to be a dowel or a pencil type object, but the bird needs to be able to wrap his feet, his claws 2/3 of the way around. If you can't get him 2/3 of the way around, he can't properly hold on to the perch, and it could be detrimental to him. So those are some important things to think about the cage. Also, as far as where you put it, you want it in a place where there's human activity so the bird will, feel part of the family, but it should never be where it's a real noisy area, where there's constant traffic going back and forth, where there's draft. Anywhere near a kitchen or a stove, birds are very susceptible to the fumes as well as the heat. They may like looking outdoors, but they shouldn't be in direct sunlight the whole time. So take some of those things into consideration before you actually adopt a bird, if you have a place to properly house him and make him part of the family, but also keep him safe as well. Birds need to sleep about 10 to 14 hours a day, and they do need some sort of UV light to make vitamin D. So those are some other considerations. As far as going to the vet, however, they don't, hey, Melanie, all the way up in Alberta, it must be cold up there. As far as veterinary visits, they should go once a year to be checked out. They are very susceptible to many of our human colds. There are actually less things we can get from birds than birds can get from us. So that's kind of another reverse thing when we're normally talking about our dogs and cats. But no vaccinations are generally required for birds. Depending on the species you choose, it might be a mix of seeds, pellets, fresh fruits, veggies. Some birds are carnivores. They'll actually even eat chicken eggs. But no chocolate, salt, or avocado. Chocolate has, the caffeine-like substance called theobromine, which can speed up the heart and lungs and cause an abundance of fluids to come out of the body in the form of vomiting, diarrhea. The avocados, especially the ones grown in Guatemala, have a high amount of persin. And persin is a toxin that can actually cause fluid to build up around the heart and in the lungs of birds and horses in particular. I know some people have concerns about that with our canine friends, but it's really more of an issue with birds and horses unless we happen to, you know, have a dog that's just sitting under an avocado tree and eating them day in and day out. Since we're on the topic, what can be dangerous for our dogs for the avocados is the skin, which can actually burn the lips and become a digestive blockage, as well as the pit. Hey, Beth, so happy to see you. So one of the easiest ways to monitor a bird's health is to just pay attention to his weight. Do a monthly weigh-in, get, you know, a little scale with grams and know his weight. Any fluctuation in his weight could be a good big sign that something isn't quite right. So if the bird's losing weight and you haven't put him on a diet, an visit to the avian veterinarian is definitely in order. For those of you familiar with doing head-to-tail checkups on dogs or cats, it's pretty much similar, but you have a smaller friend in many cases, although some of you may have a macaw or a parrot or a larger bird as well. You just want to be careful when you handle them that you never, you know, squeeze them too tight while you're holding them so that they can't breathe. Be very gentle with the wings. But some of the different things you might want to be looking for is how well they balance on the perch and if they can bear weight equally on each of their toes. Are they alert and responsive? Do they seem to be breathing easy with no signs of labored breathing? Tail bobbing, where they're kind of going up and down like this, or any abnormal motion of the tail feathers can indicate breathing issues and some other health problems. So pay attention for that. You want to look at their eyes, their ears, and their little nostrils to make sure there's no discharge. Occasionally some seeds or other things might get caught in the nostrils, and you have to be very careful as you gently wipe it away with a damp gauze or even a Q-tip if you're very careful. But you never want to stick the Q-tip up the nose or really pick at anything. Birds have what's called an operculum. Any of you that have fish know that as well. The operculum in the fish actually protects the gills. Well, the operculum is in the nostrils of the bird, and you just want to make sure that you're not picking at that and actually removing a part of the anatomy. Liz, so nice to see you. I think pretty much everybody that's joining in is in just different degrees of cold country today. So stay warm, and if it's too cold for you, it's too cold for your pets, whether it's a bird, a dog, or a cat, or any other species. Have to always put that in there. So back to the head to tail on the birds. Notice how well they're balancing and if their toes are gripping the perch equally. Are they alert and responsive? Do they seem to be breathing easily and there's no obstructions in the nostrils? Make sure their plumage, their feathers look full and healthy. Just like on our dogs and cats that we want to see a shiny coat, we want to see healthy looking plumage on a bird. When a bird starts feather picking or pulling at his chest or pulling out any of his feathers, that's generally an indication of something not quite right. Oh my gosh, Angela, I'm so happy to see you there. Mwah. And you want to check droppings. You know, we're always paying attention to those kind of things with all of our critters, but just make sure they're a normal appearance. It's really hard with birds sometimes to tell the difference between, how do I say this nicely on Facebook Live, number 1 and number 2. But you know, you need to get to know your bird and know what's normal for him. As I was saying, actually birds can get more things from us than we can from them. Parrots often pick up staph infections from humans as well as sinus infections. So the rules that follow for us to be polite around other human beings, you know, covering our cough, washing our hands, and not sharing kisses when we're sick, that should definitely apply to our avian friends as well. How many of you out there have or care for birds? Go ahead and put a yes or yay birds or something in the comment section so I know. Another thing about us humans and diseases are our normal gut bacteria actually isn't compatible with that of a bird's. So although most healthy birds don't ever, you know, suffer any ill effects from it, again, it is possible when we're sharing kisses. So, you know, it's just a good idea to err on the side of caution and be careful about that. Therese, awesome. Glad to see you joining us. Oh, and I see a little birdie there by Melanie, so I know she cares for birds. West Nile virus is another one of those things that's actually transmitted from birds to people via mosquitoes, while psittacosis, and that's that one that's difficult to spell. What is it? Psittacosis. Should we have a quiz at the end? Psittacosis or parrot fever is something we can get from birds. So it's a good idea to, obviously keep your birds mite-free, and when you're cleaning cages to sometimes wear a mask. So like I just mentioned, there are more things we can actually give to birds than get from them, but we just want to keep us healthy and our bird friends as well. Basic signs of illness for a bird are things that aren't normal for him, such as sitting on the bottom of his cage, possibly even puffed up or have his feathers being puffed up. Feather picking is another one, where they literally with their beaks are picking out feathers. You can see a bare part on the chest or on a wing or someplace. Just like, a dog might obsessively lick or even pull out fur, or a kitty cat as well. Birds do feather pick when they're not feeling their best. You should never be able to feel a bird's really pointy little breastbone. They have very strong chests because it needs to support all of the pectoral muscles that, give them the powerful muscles for flight. Another fun fact here, if humans were to be able to fly, we would have to support about 50 to 60 pounds of muscle on our chest, and our chest would have to come out 3 feet, on each side, so it would have to be 6 feet in, what is that? It's not, I guess, radius. I'm trying to get back to my geometry. Not circumference, not diameter, but I guess that would be a radius of 6 feet for humans. So birds in their tiny little packages are really powerful little machines. If their skin isn't plump, just like us, they can be dehydrated, and dehydration is such a serious ailment for, canine, feline, avian, bird, any creature. So make sure they're drinking their water, and that brings me back to when we were talking about cages earlier. Always place their food and water bowls above the perch. If it's below the perch, they might actually defecate or urinate into their food bowls. So it's important to keep them above the perch, and it's a good idea to also have a grate so any of those debris and droppings falls through and they're not walking on it on the cage floor. Then finally, anything like sneezing or nasal discharge, and any changes in vocalization, behavior, eating, drinking, bathroom habits, all of those would be the basic signs of something not quite right, meaning the bird is ill. Birds, as far as their heartbeats go, the small ones like the budgies and the canaries, they can actually have a normal heart rate of about 400 to 800 beats per minute. What are us humans? About 60 to 72, and our dogs are 80 to 160, cats can be 160 to 200, 220. We're talking 400 to 800 beats per minute for a canary. So it's pretty difficult for us to actually palpate that pulse. A larger bird, such as a parrot, would be a little bit slower, which follows suit with those of you that know about dogs and cats, would be about 140 to 200 beats per minute. But in flight, or if he's agitated, a parrot's heartbeat can be as fast as 1,000 beats per minute, which is mind-boggling. As far as breathing, that's a little bit more in conjunction with us and our dogs and cats. Small birds, about 30 to 60 breaths per minute, and our bigger birds, a little bit slower, about 10 to 30. On average, a bird's temperature is 105 degrees. But the best way generally to check that is knowing the temperature of the room, of his environment. And what we like to keep that at is around 85 degrees, especially when we're trying to warm them up. But keeping a sick bird in particular warm is absolutely vital. Place a towel over the cage, add a heat lamp or a heating pad. Just, be ever so careful with anything electrical or making sure you don't make something too hot. And you can even add towels to the cage floor or gently wrap a bird when he isn't his best and you're trying to warm him up and nurse him back to health. Some of the most common injuries and ailments that might befall our feathered friends, along with some of the simple steps you can take before you get to that avian veterinarian. And do realize I am saying avian veterinarian, bird doctor, because not necessarily all of our dog and cat veterinarians do help work with the exotics. So make sure you have the appropriate vet for the species you care for. So some of the things that I want to talk about with a bird is that it can be attacked by another family pet, meaning generally a dog or a cat. You always have to monitor if you have other pets in the house, and especially if you're letting the bird fly free or if the cage door is open for any reason. But should the worst happen, try to avoid any additional stress with the bird by handling him as little but calmly as possible and keeping him warm, like we just mentioned, to prevent shock. And remember, shock is the depletion of oxygen through the tissues of the body. It is life-threatening. Blood isn't circulating at the speed it should, and we're in an emergency situation. So keep that birdie warm. If there are any wounds, you can wash them very gently with 3% hydrogen peroxide or Hibiclens, a chlorhexidine, that pink antibacterial soap, and rinse carefully. But in many cases, the bird is going to require antibiotics. So you can do a little first aid, but you're going to need that veterinarian's help. If it was a cat attack, no offense to our kitties, but they do carry a bacteria in their mouth called Pasteurella, and it can actually be fatal to birds. So if a cat got the canary, as they proverbially say, please get him to the vet as quickly as possible, the bird that is. If there's any bleeding, apply direct pressure with gauze. But just take care again with our tiny little friends as you're applying that direct pressure that you're not restricting breathing in any fashion. If a wing is broken, you can secure it to the body with, some gauze roll, just so that he won't keep flapping it and hurting it, and then taping it down. But again, as you're taping and wrapping, make sure you're not restricting bleeding. A big thing that can happen to birds is a broken blood feather. A blood feather or a pin feather is a new feather. It hasn't reached maturation. It's still growing, and from the hair follicle, there's actually a vein or an artery that goes all the way up through the feather. And for different reasons, it can break from his own scratching or grooming, banging against a cage, or being attacked by a family pet. If it is bleeding and from the little stalk, from the stem going up the feather, you can apply direct pressure right there. Use a little styptic powder, flour, cornstarch always work. But if it seems to be broken more at the base, or if the bleeding you can't seem to stop through the vein of the feather, you're going to have to remove the feather if you feel confident and calm enough to do so. Now, obviously, this is something a veterinarian can help you with, but depending on your time and how much bleeding is happening, you may need to go ahead and take tweezers, or take needle nose pliers, depending on the size of the bird, and actually get as close to the skin as you can and pull it straight out. No twisting, just pull straight out, kind of like you would a tick on a dog or a cat, and then immediately apply direct pressure right at the body of the bird. If you're doing it there, do not put the styptic. Just use the flour or the cornstarch, because we don't want anything getting in systemically into the body. And if the blood feather is actually broken below the skin, apply that direct pressure and get quickly to the vet, because there's not a whole lot us as lay people can do for that. And the bird's going to be uncomfortable, and he's going to need bleeding to stop and obviously prevent infection and prevent shock. So keep him warm, apply the direct pressure. You can use the styptic powder only if you are trying to stop the bleeding actually in the wing, where the vein or artery comes through. Sometimes birds do puncture or cut their tongues. That's another good place to use the cornstarch or the flour to try to get the bleeding to stop. And one other thing I want to talk about is straining. When a bird's trying to lay an egg and it won't come out. The best thing you can do, besides getting her to the vet, is to keep her in her cage in a calm, quiet area, but make it a more humid environment. Add some warm, moist towels in there, cover the cage, and contact the vet. Birds who actually fly free are more likely to suffer burns because they can land on a stove or in the fireplace or on any hot surface. So just always monitor and make sure they're well hydrated even in this winter time of year. You know, birds, like all of us creatures, need to get that hydration in. There are so many more things I know we can talk about in bird first aid, and I've kept you already for 20 minutes today. This could be a whole little class at some point, but poisoning, regurgitation, vomiting, diarrhea, breathing difficulties. If you want to learn more, I guess this would be a shameless plug, but my Pet Safety Crusaders, My Pet and Me Guide to Pet Disaster Preparedness, hold on, actually has a whole section on bird first aid in it, and talks about all the things you could need in your bird first aid kit and whatnot. So that's a good source to go to in the meantime. But let me just mention about shock, since it is a life-threatening condition, and you know, any loss of blood or breathing difficulty and cardiac arrest or all could bring it on. Shock is when, you know, the bird isn't receiving sufficient blood and oxygen. He may fluff his feathers, or he may actually appear lifeless. His eyes may even be partly closed. We want to get the bird really warm, make sure his environment is 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Cover that cage and contact your vet for further instructions, but you probably need to be in the car on the way. Birds, just like our dogs and cats, may not be used to car rides. And you don't have to take a bird very often, but especially, you know, in this day of disasters happening all the time, it's just imperative that the bird understands. He's not going to read my book, okay? So the way we teach our creatures is through demonstration and repetition. So I'm not going to say every week, but you know, a few times a year, you probably should get your bird in his traveling crate, sit in the car, have the motor running, obviously the garage door open, so you don't asphyxiate either of yourselves, and maybe even take a short ride around the block. It wouldn't even be out of order if you actually took the bird in his traveling crate to the vet's office, went in, sat down, maybe gave him a few treats in the cage, just like we do with dogs and cats, get him back in the car, leave, and go home. I don't want to do too much to stress your birds, but it's always better if anybody, you know, knows what to expect. And that might just take the edge off when he actually has to go to the vet, that it won't seem as scary. I can't thank you guys enough for tuning in on this Monday morning. I hope I've given you a little introduction about birds. If you want to hear more, let me know about that in the comments, and you know, we'll pick up this topic in more detail in the future. But I hope you learned a few things, and I was just delighted to see you all join me. So have an awesome possum week, and I'll see you on Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And I think we're talking about walking your dog, because it is National Dog Walking Month. So see you then. Bye-bye for now.